Live, where news comes first. This is ABC-7 Xtra.
Good evening, I'm Maria Garcia. Welcome to ABC-7 Extra. Tonight we're talking about something that appeared to upset a lot of people this week. The city of El Paso rejected a more than $50,000 grant by the state to conduct a historic survey of downtown. The survey would have determined which buildings downtown were historic and started the path for a National Historic District. But the City Council said downtown property owners, many of them, did not support the survey. This issue came down to trust. The city says the property owners were concerned the survey would be a precursor to regulations and restrictions. But supporters of the survey, even some other property owners, pointed out the grant came with absolutely no restrictions and instead could unleash millions of dollars of state and federal tax credits to improve downtown buildings. Supporters of the survey believe the City Council made a decision that favored a small group of property owners based on unfounded fears. Others say preservationists have been abrasive and have, quote, demonized property owners, and property owners simply don't trust their efforts. Joining us tonight, City Representative Peter Svarzbein, Bernie Sargent from the El Paso Historical Commission, and Tanny Berg from the Central Business Association. You can email us your comments and questions now to ABC7extra@KVIA.com. Call us at 915-496-1775, or you can tweet me at MariaGABC7. We're trying a new system that shows your tweets on the bottom of the screen, so if you want your tweets to show up there, make sure you use the hashtag ABC7Extra. Before our discussion, let's get a quick recap of what happened this week.
Disappointed but not surprised.
El Paso is the last major city in Texas to conduct a historic survey like this, and cities usually go after these grants because they unleash federal tax credits that can save property owners money when improving their buildings.
The kind of collaboration and communication that needed to be done for us to accept this grant, which was genuine stakeholder involvement as well as genuine input from the preservation community and from the city, never occurred in a way that was adequate.
Many downtown property owners are concerned the survey would lead to future regulations on them. And City Rep Courtney Nyland was adamant there was a, quote, end game. But over and over again, city employees and preservation advocates told City Council that just was not so.
And yet they got up here today and some of them pontificated over and over again, oh, restriction. No, there's no restrictions involved.
We were supposed to complete this by September of 2016, so I think it would have given us ample time to really gather that input from stakeholders. So I think it was a little irresponsible to deny the grant.
Only City Reps Claudia Ordaz and Lily Limon voted against rejecting the grant. Let's start our discussion now with our City Representative Peter Svarzbein, Tanny Berg with the Central Business Association, and Bernie Sargent with the El Paso Historical Commission. Thank you to all three of you for joining us. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have a lot to get to, but Peter, I want to start with you. When I first spoke to you about this, it was, I think, a couple of weeks ago. You had just gotten into office. You were trying to understand what exactly had happened. You were trying to figure out how we got here, and you put it on the agenda to try to vet this publicly on Monday. We know how that turned out. And I know you were stressed out about the decision, and I know you agonized over it. But ultimately, there's a lot of people who believe you broke a really big campaign promise really quickly.
You know, I have shown through my actions in the last 4 years with my involvement with the El Paso Streetcar Project, my support and dedication for historic preservation. And I think that having a historic streetcar line will only offer more of an incentive for a place for historic preservation within our downtown redevelopment. But what I saw when I came into council and what I tried to understand in less than 3 weeks now that I've been a city councilman is that while I support what the County Historical Commission was trying to do and what the City of El Paso, the economic development, was trying to do with this grant and with this survey, the kind of support and the kind of consensus that was needed from multiple sides of this community simply wasn't there. And if you look back at that meeting, after some of the other city councilmen went up and spoke their piece, which I think a lot of it was based on misinformation, I tried to put a motion, my first motion as a city councilman, to extend as long as we could accepting this grant, and to create a task force or a commission so we could get those moderate voices from the business community and from the preservation community together to build some consensus. The fact is our city has some problems, our city has some opportunities, but the only way forward where we go is if we can get people talking to each other and getting some consensus so that we can keep on going in the right direction.
Now, the El Paso Historical Commission has said they tried to start that conversation, but I want to we already have some feedback. Daniel Lopez sending us a message saying, my concern on this issue is that the small group of downtown investors and the public servants whose campaigns they funded will use the public airways to whitewash the real truth. So, and I'm sure you know already that there's people who are saying that this gives a perception that you are beholden, I should say, to people who contributed to your campaign, who are property owners now.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's kind of an insulting suggestion. I've had people that have contributed to my campaign that are actively involved in historic preservation programs now in downtown. I've had campaign contributions from environmentalists. I've had campaign contributions from land developers. I've had campaign contributions from artists. I've had campaign contributions from bankers. People elected me because they wanted somebody that could bring some intelligence and some common sense to our city council, and that was where my vote was based on.
Okay, speaking of intelligence and common sense, so there's people who believe that this decision was based on fear, on misinformation, on misperceptions instead of facts.
Yeah.
And they were looking to you and other city reps as saying, you are the smart, progressive people. What happened?
Well, I don't know what happened because I've been in council for 3 weeks. So it seemed that this run-up to gain consensus to approve this grant wasn't where it needed to be. And I don't know who exactly is at fault there, whether it was from the city's economic development department, whether it was from folks with preservationists. To me, what this vote pointed to, and a lot of the misinformation is based on the fact that there's a lot of mistrust between the different communities here. And when somebody doesn't believe the messenger of that message, no matter how good it is, it's really hard to build that consensus and that agreement that is necessary.
Okay, I want to get to the point you're making there, and before that, I do want to say we did invite City Representative Courtney Nyland, who led the effort to reject the grant. She said she was out of town, but she sent us a statement, and we're going to get to that in just a bit. But Bernie, I want to get to the point that Peter was saying, that if you don't believe the messenger, no matter how good their message is, people just aren't going to buy it. And we've heard from city representatives saying that there are people in the preservation community whose methods are abrasive and are aggressive and whose rhetoric is harmful, and that property owners just don't trust whatever it is that they're bringing to the table.
I've heard that, and I know that there's a lot of passion on both sides of the arena. We met with every single city representative at least once, and some with more than one time, and felt pretty confident that we had conveyed our sincerity and the nuts and bolts of what this meant, not being any kind of an encumbrance on the property owner, entirely up to the property owner to take advantage of the 45% tax credits, and that we had a time element that we had to follow in order to accept the funds and use the funds. And it was $50,000 was very much on the high end of what the state normally gives out on an annual basis, to the point that it actually stopped other communities in Texas from receiving any funds to do a survey and ultimately expand or develop a national historic district. And so they were quite disappointed and shocked that we didn't go forward with it. Then we also got a grant from the Summerlee Foundation to add to that. So we had about half of, if not more, of what we needed to accomplish a survey to expand the national, or actually put in place a National Historic District downtown. Now, when we talked with the City Council representatives, myself and Max Grossman, we felt that we had two people that were kind of on the fence. Then we had consensus from everyone else that we were going to go forward with it. So it caught me by surprise when there was such a strong sentiment expressed last Monday. Totally opposed to it. I mean, just totally opposed to it, with information that wasn't accurate. They were citing situations that took place that were caused by the local historic district designation, which is much more strenuous and difficult to meet. Not impossible, but more difficult to meet the requirements that are put forth. And they kept quoting those kinds of things that were taking place. I think the sad thing is you know, Peter's new there, and a lot of the folks on council didn't really have a lot of the details. There were some of us that have a lot of that information, and we could have conveyed that, but the rules of city council is we have 3 minutes to talk, and they don't normally just let you come right back up and try to offer input. So yeah, we were quite disappointed, and the passions really ran high after that. Some to fault, I will admit, and I've asked some folks to kind of, let's tone it down.
But even before the decision, Bernie,
Yeah.
there's some concern that the rhetoric, you mentioned Max Grossman,
Yeah.
from Mr. Grossman on Facebook is so scathing and so harmful that it erodes trust, and it helps to destroy your cause instead of help it.
It works on both sides of the fence, because we've had some property owners that have been very, very strong in their sentiments too. Now, they're not as ever present in the press, but behind the scenes they're very vocal and very strong in what they're saying, opposed to conservation, preservation of these sites. We're capitalists just like the business owners. We believe in, you know, the opportunities, and I admire the folks like Tanny and others that have been very successful in their development programs and packages throughout the whole community of El Paso, and try to develop El Paso. You know, facts are we're 23% of El Pasoans are below poverty level, so we're trying to reach out to these people. We're trying to create an esprit de corps in a community, and to do that, we have to side up with the folks that are downtown. I'd like to be able to have property downtown, but we want to help these people. You know, there's folks down there that have run into situations where they want to improve their buildings, but they find it difficult to do so because the city doesn't have the staff to support them, to handhold them from A to B so that they get these things done in a timely fashion, in an economical fashion. So what we're trying to do is build that up. Now, along the way, certainly some things were said, and hindsight being 20/20, probably shouldn't have been said, but moving forward, we need to convey to the folks that we're here to help them. We're here not to make it difficult or impossible for the developers to do something downtown. We want to make it a positive. You know, Peter here wants to do a lot with the trolley. I think the trolley's a wonderful idea. The trolley by itself is not going to drive downtown El Paso. You know, it's going to take a lot more than that. And there's got to be something for the people to see when they come down to downtown El Paso. Okay,
now I do want to get to the statement we received from City Representative Courtney Nyland. She mentions that she's done a lot to support historic preservation downtown. She mentions the Martin building and the Mills building, and she says that she believes in incentivizing it rather than further regulating property owners. And I want to get to a specific part of her statement that she sent us, if we can get those graphics. She says, the challenge with the preservationists is some have created such an adverse relationship with many of the downtown property owners because of their approach and style that it becomes difficult for us to build consensus about the importance of rehabbing our important historic buildings. She goes on to say, this grant should have never been applied for without involving the downtown stakeholders on the front end, so they would have a better understanding of the purpose and potential implications. Conceptually, I support the purpose behind the grant. We should have a better sense of the historic assets we have and work to develop a game plan to preserve them. But most of those who are involved in historic preservation advocacy don't own anything downtown, so they are basically imposing their values and philosophies on others who want to be able to use their property and not be potentially saddled with onerous regulatory oversight that makes it financially impossible to retrofit an old building for another use. Tanny, I want to ask you a question, and I do want to have you respond to that in just a minute, Bernie, but City Representative Lily Limon this week said during the meeting, you know, when it comes to investing in downtown, when it comes to asking us to invest in an arena or in the ballpark, downtown is for everybody, right? Downtown is El Pasoans' living room. But when it comes to this situation, It appeared to a lot of people like the voices that really mattered when it came to downtown were the voices of property owners. You heard over and over again when speakers would come up on Monday, City Rep Courtney Nyland asking them if they owned property. And for a lot of El Pasoans, that seems like their voices matter less if they don't own property downtown, when downtown should belong to everyone. What do you think about that?
Well, certainly over the last 40 years, I've dedicated my life to rebuilding downtown El Paso. The Union Plaza was a name that I gave. Nestor Valencia and Nat Campos and I, in planning, gave it that name back in the 1990s. And so looking at downtown restoration and downtown revitalization has been a calling for me over the last 40 years. I think when we talk about public projects, then certainly all of us have a buy-in to public projects, but there are still, owners still have rights. I mean, owners do have rights to their property. You have rights over your house. People who own properties all over the city have rights to their properties. And I think it was interesting what Bernie said a minute ago, that he made it a point to see each and every city council representative to talk about this. My question to him would be, how many property owners did he talk to? Did he actually convey how beneficial this would be and how they could participate and we could come in unison, which is what Pete Svarzbein actually wanted, for us to come together as one common element for the best interests of downtown and for the best interests of El Paso as a whole. But I think there are a couple of points that need to be clarified. I think when I got up and spoke, and I think I was about the only person who spoke for the way that the motion ended, it was because I had known that there were already surveys done in El Paso. In 1992, we dedicated $75,000 to doing a survey of downtown properties. In 2001, we did an update to those surveys. I had asked Economic Development, especially Jessica Herrera, who works with Economic Development for the city, to produce those documents so we could get a basis upon which we could now solicit for this $55,000 grant, by the way, which had to be met with an additional $55,000 out of our money. So it was $110,000 for a survey that we had previously spent $75,000 on. They didn't have it. At that moment, Economic Development did not have it. They did promise City Council that they would get it. And immediately the next day, I did receive a survey that had been done declaring the South El Paso district a historic district. And here's a copy of that report that was given to me by Economic Development. That wasn't good enough. I wanted to know what buildings had a historic overlay, and could I get the huge survey that was done in 1992 and then subsequently updated in 2002. So on Friday of this past week, just 2 days ago, I did receive from the city a 200-page detailed survey of every downtown property of historical significance, and it was detailed to the type of structure it was, suggestions on how they should be revitalized, everything that this other survey was going to do. We already had it, but nobody had seen it because it was buried in a vault when we moved from the old City Hall to the new City Hall.
Okay, and I want to get to that.
Let me just get one last point.
They're telling me I have to take a commercial break. It's 10:54. We're going to get to a commercial break. I'll let you finish your point, and I know, Bernie, I know you have something to say about this and Representative Nyland's comments when we come back, so stay with us. You're watching ABC-7 Extra. We're also going to get to our phone lines and to Twitter right away after this segment, so stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking about that historic grant for downtown El Paso for the survey that the city rejected this week. Tanny, I'm going to let you finish that point.
Very quickly. So I went to the National Registry site and I looked up buildings that already have an overlay. And believe it or not, on the National Registry site, you could pull up every county in the state of Texas. When you went to El Paso County, there was a message that said this page has temporarily been released, so it's not there. So I went to Wikipedia and asked it for all the downtown properties that have historical overlays, and sure enough, I found 19 buildings, all of which are open to receiving the 45% funding, tax credit funding, that already have historic overlays with the National Registry and with the state registry. To get the national, then I went to see What does it take to get that registry? You have to go through the state first. That could take 90 days, and then 30 additional days to get through the national registry. And these 19 buildings, which include virtually every downtown property that is declared historically significant, already has an overlay, can't be torn down, has to be built out within the guidelines of the National Registry, and already is complying with whatever regulations we were about to spend $110,000 worth of public funding on. If you say to me, we want to update what we currently have, and I think Peter's point at that meeting was really good. I think what he wanted, and Courtney and Island as well, was let's see what we've got. I think we haven't gotten all the information. And by the way, this funding for this grant can be reapplied in September.
But Bernie, I mean, you heard from the state saying they weren't going to give us the same points if we applied again.
Yeah, they'll look at it at a different, with a different view because we've turned it down. And they did stretch it out and actually give us 56, no, 6,000 more than the 50 max that anybody could have gotten. And they have told me that there's just no way that they could look at it the same way because there's not a lot of confidence that the city of El Paso will move forward with it. And to what Tanny said, the 19 buildings only reflects a percentage of the buildings downtown. The survey we were going to accomplish was going to be more than just the 1991-2001 package that was laid out previously. It was going to grow. History or historical buildings is in the eye of the beholder. Some are historic, some aren't. As years go on, 1991 was a few years ago, there's a few more buildings that could be historic. And so we have to look at that. And to the City Council Nyland's comment about the stakeholders, because we don't have buildings downtown, what we say and what we request aren't as important. We're taxpayers. You know, I'm looking at the property taxes I pay on my house. There's a 5-story building downtown that pays less taxes per year than I do. I think I have an interest in what goes on downtown with some of these buildings. Not that I want to force my thoughts and my beliefs on that person, but why is that building so low in rent? If you look at Santa Fe, if you look at parts of Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, where they went forward with these kinds of programs and packages, the property values increased. Now, certainly on the downside of that, they pay more taxes, but at the same time, the rentals went up, the occupancy went up. It was a win-win for the property owners. So business as usual is not the winning solution.
Can I just clarify something about when I was there on Monday? With my vote, the second part of that motion was to order staff, or to basically order staff to continue to have a conversation and dialogue with stakeholders and preservation owners to come up with a timeline and solutions about how to move forward. I know that if we can come together with some moderate voices and be able to approach council, whether it's in 6 months or a year, and be able to approach the state again, I know that we'll be in a better footing moving forward. And one of the things I'm looking to do within the next 3 months is to come up with a summit for downtown redevelopment and historic preservation, bringing in some local voices and perhaps some outside voices too, so we can continue this conversation which is so desperately needed in this community.
We'll take you up on that in a few months, Peter. We have an email from Jaime. If there would be zero effect to the downtown building owners, then why do the preservationists care? They are falsely claiming that nothing negative will happen when they know that this grant will 100% open the door to regulation, period. Otherwise, they would have zero interest in the grant because it would not help them force property owners to do what they want them to. How do you respond to that, Bernie?
Yeah, and I've read a lot of his comments, and on both sides of the spectrum, there's comments that have been a little bit too far out there. No, it would not 100% require these people to meet regulations. Any regulations that the city deems additional, they would have to vote in. To that point, I know that Representative Nyland said that when she leaves office, what's to say that her replacement's not going to say, I need more regulation. That's true, but that's when you have to depend on the voters, and you have to convince the voters that you're going to be elected to carry their trust forward. And also, there was a couple of comments made that we didn't reach out to the people. 2002, 2013, 2014, we had what we called a Heritage Preservation Summit. Very well attended, Everyone in the community was invited. There was a lot of press that was taking place, no cost to anybody attending, and we had experts on all aspects of what we're talking about today, discussing historic preservation. And also in 2014, one of the major topics we were talking about was the history of place, and this particular grant, what it could mean to El Paso as a whole, not just the 19 buildings plus downtown, but also going into Segundo Barrio and the Chihuahuita areas of El Paso. A lot of heritage, a lot of history that we would like to develop for the community of El Paso.
Okay, let's go to our phone lines. We have Carlos from the west side. Carlos, what's your comment or your question?
Taxes, raising taxes seems to be the solution to everything. Losing money on grants and everything seems to be the process. Is the acceptance of mediocrity by city government, county government, and individual entities in this community, is it the norm? This question is for everybody in the panel. Have we accepted this to be the norm in El Paso?
Really quick. As I mentioned earlier, we're going on $2 billion in debt with certificates of obligation and bonds. We have a $450 million bond that the community approved. I chair the bond oversight or overview committee, and my concern is I'm watching taxes go up. We're now looking at a little over 2% tax increase on the average home in the city of El Paso, and that's just one small portion of what every property owner has to endure. Certainly Tanny's very much aware of how much property taxes people have to pay. If we're trying to entice people into moving to this community to retire or otherwise, how can we continue to raise taxes on these people and make it more and more expensive for them on fixed incomes to live here? That's not the objective. Our objective is to make it appealing for people so that we don't have the brain drain or the Bloomberg report that recently said that there's a lot of people leaving El Paso for various reasons. We want them to stay here. We want them to be excited about their home.
We have some tweets. Eduardo tweeting, regulation is being used as a curse word. If we did not have regulation, we would be eating bad food more often than now. Gabriel tweeting, great idea to show tweets on screen. Thanks, Gabriel. Catherine saying, Peter is selling out. Angel saying, I'm glad Peter is trying to extend the conversation and preservation of downtown. Calvin tweeting, we can't move forward if there's fear of progressing. Robert tweeting, squabbles over surveys while the wrecking ball keeps on swinging, shakes my head. Eduardo tweeting, moneyed interests have been more adversarial by destroying buildings that are clearly historical. And Alfredo tweeting, extremists muddy the waters. I commend Peter for having a level head. Alex tweeting, Representative Svarzbein has always been in support of historic preservation. We'll be back with more questions, and we'll be back with more phone calls from viewers, so stay with us. Welcome back. Let's get to our callers. We have Grace from Central on the phone. Hi, Grace. What's your comment or your question?
Instead of taking care of lights on airport, close to the airport, finish what you started downtown and restore it. It is a shame the way it looks.
Okay, that was Grace from Central expressing her thoughts. We have an email from Joseph. If preservationists are being abrasive, it's with good reason. Simply look at the condition of our downtown area. What was once a glorious, thriving, and beautiful downtown is now a sad and embarrassing city center. We need to preserve El Paso's historic downtown before it's too late. The city needs to do everything in its power to restore downtown to its former glory while also embracing modern infrastructure and architecture. Now, I do want to talk about downtown development. You know, the city says there's been $53 million of investment in downtown since the ballpark. And essentially, we heard Representative Nyland say, you know, use the analogy over and over of the carrot and the stick. You have to incentivize, entice property owners to rehab their buildings instead of regulate them, she says. And so, when you look at the 1992 survey, you know, some point out that there was nothing done after that. There was no traction. That nobody was redeveloping any buildings or doing anything downtown to make it look better. Whereas when the city started incentivizing a few years ago, that's when you started to see property owners really put money into rehabbing these buildings. What do you think about that, Bernie?
There has been a push historically to move and spread out from downtown, convenience of strip malls, so on and so forth in the outlying areas. convenience of getting to and from your place of business or your place where you want to shop. And now the push is going back to the downtown city center. And to that end, folks have started investing downtown, and I give them a lot of credit for doing it. We do have some programs in place for facade development, for improvements in the buildings. We were working diligently to spread out that availability of tax credits and funds by expanding the downtown historic district to make it a national historic district, and just make it more available to people. Again, the baseball stadium, beautiful stadium. I mean, it is a gorgeous stadium, but there's nothing going on there a big part of the year. After 75 home games, it just sort of lays dormant. We have an arena coming up soon somewhere downtown. We don't know where that's going to be. All of these things are going to be, they're going to swallow up property. They will add to the downtown attention, but will they bring the public down there when there's no events taking place? We need stuff going on all the time. Union Plaza, Tanny talked about. That's a diamond, and it just needs to be polished.
And Tanny, we heard from property owners on Monday saying, I am not a multi-million-dollar property owner downtown. I own this building, and if I got those tax credits that this survey could unleash, I could do so much more to improve that building. So there's property owners who say, hey, don't monopolize my voice. Don't say like all property owners are against us. There are people out there who say this would have really helped me with my building downtown.
So let's talk about regulations. When you access those 45% tax credits that are available for renovation of buildings, they come with severe restrictions. And if you talk to property owners who have actually gotten those funds, they invest substantially more money in their properties than they receive in tax credits. And I think that the Mills building is a good example of that. I think the Martin renovation, I read in today's paper that even the Martin renovation, that there are restrictions on the windows that he can use and the way that that has to be developed in order to access those funds that make it extremely onerous on a property owner. This survey was only going to make historical properties within this district open to receiving these funds. I'm not sure that that actually is an incentive to go ahead and renovate properties. I think what we've got to do is sit down with property owners, use all the tools that are in our chest, and that's what we heard over and over again at City Council. Use all the tools that we have available to encourage property owners to go along with creating something.
But you heard somebody like Bill Helm, for example, with In Situ Architecture, who's downtown, saying local incentives just don't compare with state and federal incentives.
I don't think Bill Howell has renovated a historic building.
That's not true.
Well, if he has,
absolutely not
and
true.
Accessed the 45% in funding?
Absolutely.
Well, his company, his architecture company did the Martin building, right?
If you talk to Wright and Dalbin, they've done the same thing. They are somewhat onerous to go after.
And more expensive. And substantially more expensive.
Well, one particular gentleman went after his incentives, and he realized $1.5 million in tax savings or tax credits. Without it, he would have probably realized somewhere close to $600,000. That's kind of a nice increase. Now, the truth is, he could have got more had he gotten help at the beginning and walked through the process. He could have been eligible for a lot more tax credit.
Peter, I have a question for you. Even if there's clearly some division between the perception of preservationists in the eyes of property owners. And I'm sorry, Bernie, I know you're more than preservationist, but that's sort of the de facto term that everybody seems to be using.
It's a four-letter word, it seems like. Yeah.
And between property owners, and there seems to be this inherent conflict. Is it your job as a city rep to go above the fray, to go sort of above the divisive dialogue, and to look at the big picture, to look at the long-term thing, to look at what's really good for El Paso based on the facts? And couldn't you have done that by accepting the grant, knowing that the survey wasn't due until next September, and you could have had that time to build consensus?
It's a good question. For me, my vote was continuing that conversation and thinking a little bit more strategically. I could have easily voted to accept the grant and be one of two other voices where there was no chance for that grant to go down. I'm sure that I would have, not have been as vilified online had I done that. But for me, what I was trying to concentrate on was thinking strategically about how we can get those moderate voices to get together. Our cultural heritage and our cultural economy is just as important as our economic one. And we can't progress as a city without our history. You have to know where you're going to know where you're going to go. And with my involvement so early on, I thought it was important to continue this dialogue. Being involved, I guess, in politics now, I'm still developing how to think politically as opposed to thinking logically. And I guess I'll continue to work on that. But to me, it was important to continue this conversation, and it was important to view myself as much as possible to be a bridge so that those voices that want to work together can see the light. But the fact is if you have a neighbor that's, yells at you every day when you come home and throws pots and pans in your front yard and then says, the next day, oh, I want to build a fence with you, are you really going to trust that person? Are you really going to want to build something with them? So we really need to think about that. Evidently, I'm
Clearly, you're saying the bad neighbor is the preservation community.
I'm saying at this point, there's a lot of people there, and there's a lot of mistrust on both sides. So taking a step back, instructing staff to continue that conversation and trying to build some consensus is vitally important.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming. We ran out of time. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tanny. We appreciate it. Thank you so much, Bernie. I appreciate you. Tanny, you were so accessible when I called you, and you didn't give any conditions, ask any questions. You just came on. Bernie, you always say stuff that is sometimes very unpopular, but that takes guts, and I appreciate it. And Peter, I know you were worried, and this was hard for you, and there's a lot of elected officials who will make very impactful decisions and then refuse to answer questions about them publicly later, and so I appreciate that you didn't do that and that you came on this program.
Thank you very much for having me, Maria.
Thank you so much for joining us on ABC-7 Extra. We hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.